Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the Sedra of tetze. And we continue the theme of each each Sedra, each portion in the Torah that we read at the end of each week, specifically in the month of Elul, is giving us encouragement, is giving us pointers as to how we can utilize this incredible gift of the month of Elul, which instead of winding down as the last month of the year, we are preparing for Rosh Hashanah, for the head of the year, for the control, the headquarters of the year that is going to set us up for the coming year. And this is the month that we can really get into the mindset, get into the right uh, action plan for the coming year. And last week we talked about the theme, that was the end of the first week of the month of Elul. We'll talk about the theme of Shoftim. It was the Seder of Shoftim, which brings to mind the courtroom visualization, which is such an important part of Rosh Hashanah, which is also referred to as Yom Hadin, which is Judgment Day. And we have this concept of being judge, of courtrooms, and that concept of Shoftim, also the focus on this idea of tzedek tirdof, this pursuit of justice. This was something that was, as it were, the preparation for the end of the first week of Elul. In this week's portion of tetze, we are beginning with the paragraph that talks about the Yafas Torah, which is the exceptionally beautiful female captive. The enemy, a soldier on the battlefield, sees this woman, a woman from the belonging to the enemy, and has a very strong desire, and there is a special process that he has to follow, and he is then able to take her as a wife. That is the beginning. The end of the Sedra talks about the requirement to blot out the memory of Amalek, bringing to mind the battle that Amalek waged against the Jewish people when they left the land of Egypt, which is recounted in the book of Shemos, in the book of Exodus. Within that full circle, within those two bookends of war, and the opening words are ki tetze lemilchama, this when you go out to war, there are in this week's Sedra the largest number of mitzvahs, of commandments, than in any other Sedra. We have 27 mitzvahs aseh, 27 actions that we need to carry out, and then we have 47 mitzvahs lo aseh, 47 deeds that we are prohibited from doing. Within this vast number, 74 in total, there is a common theme, and I think many, if not all, of these mitzvahs, some more obviously, some more subtly, are showing us how we need to behave towards people, or any part of Hashem's world, extends to animals as well. And this is how we define ourselves. And it is all the more impressive and unusual that this is done in the context of the battlefield. As I said, it begins with war, it ends with war. And if you actually look at customs and traditions of pre-war preparations over the years in very different cultures, it is generally a very bloodthirsty, very aggressive, whether this was by means of rhetoric, whether this was because people would speak and harangue the troops and really, I would say, decrease their humanity and increase their need to conquer and to kill other human beings in the process. And sometimes this was done by means of drugs, and this is happening today in various parts of the world, where the soldiers are deliberately given drugs to desensitize them to the kind of behavior that they are going to be carrying out on the battlefield. There's a custom called scarification, where the soldiers would cut themselves and wound themselves, and in so doing show how brave they are, show how strong they are, and all of this is very commonplace, I would say, and one can understand you're talking to warriors, you're talking to people who are in a war situation, and that there is a certain very sad logic to that type of behavior before the war. What is the Torah doing in this Sedra telling us when we go out to war, when you go out to war? Everything practically that is within this Sedra is very, very considerate of of people in very challenging situations, people who are vulnerable. And it starts with the Yafas Torah. It starts with this captive lady who, in any other part of the world, would not really be able to dream of decent treatment. And here the Torah details the process that has to be followed, that if a soldier sees such a woman and he wants to take her, he must marry her, but before he does that, she needs to spend a month and she needs to perform certain actions, and then after this month, if he still wants to marry her, then he can go ahead. And very fascinating comment that Rashi makes. This is chapter 21, verse 10. Kisetze la milchama al oivecha. If it's when you go out, although it's actually translated here as if you go out to war against your enemies. Anasana Hashem Elohecha b'yodcha v'shavsa shivyo. And Hashem will deliver your enemy into your hands, and you seize captives. And you see among the captives Eshes Yefas Toar, a very beautiful woman, and you desire her, you should take her for yourself as a wife. And so we look at Rashi here. This is verse 11, chapter 21. Lo dibra Torah ela keneged Yetzirah. The Torah is speaking here in reference to the Yetzirah. She'im ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu matira yisa'ena be'isor. That if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, did not permit this action, then the soldier would marry this captive woman, even if it was forbidden. Aval im nas'a, if he marries her, sofa liyos son'ah, if he goes ahead, even in this permitted way, what will happen? Because she is not a suitable partner, she is a captive of an idolatrous nation, and it's something that's very unlikely to bring a good influence into the home. He will end up hating her, shenema acharo, because it says afterwards, ki tihiena leish v'gomer, if there will be to a man, etc. V'sofa laholiv mimena ben sorer umore, and after marrying this captive, he will then end up hating her, and they will have a child who is a rebellious and wayward child. The process that Rashi is going through here is that he's connecting those three paragraphs that follow one another in our portion. That first we hear about this Yefas Toar, this captive woman, who then ends up becoming the wife of the soldier. But because it's not a suitable match, he ends up hating her, and then as a result, the next portion that follows the portion about the hated wife is the portion about the rebellious son. And so what we are seeing is that the seemingly unconnected incidents that are being described in the Torah are a cascade of events, and the Torah is giving us the tools, is warning us, because although this soldier on the battlefield is possessed of this very strong desire, and the Torah is going to find a way to to permit this. And this is the only case where this has happened, where this is happening, because in other situations, well, we may have this Yetzer Hara, this urge, inclination to do something that is against the Torah. The Torah doesn't allow us to do it in the way that is described here. And I think perhaps because the circumstances of the battlefield and this potent desire of the man for the woman, these are two clashing and very powerful drives. And so that the exception is made in this case, that what really should have been forbidden completely is allowed in a prescribed way. And but even so, the consequences that ensue are going to be disastrous and escalating in disaster. And if we look at all of the mitzvahs that are contained within the bookends of this week's Sedra, we open with war, we end with war, and in the middle, on the battlefield, ironically enough, we have a concentration of mitzvahs that make sure that we are protecting, we are thinking about the most vulnerable parts of our society, starting with our personal relationships, going beyond the personal relationships into communal relationships, and then even extending to animals, to protect animals, to look after animals, and really consistently to see, usually in an environment where caring for the vulnerable is the last thing you want to be doing on the battlefield, you would think that might is right, survival of the fittest. But the Torah is saying no. On the battlefield, physically, actually, and the month that the Yefas To'ah, this captive woman, was supposed to be spending mourning for her family in a very unappealing way, and this month is compared to the month of Elul. And really, this is the connection that the rabbis make between the portion that we're reading this coming week and the month. And I think that we're going to carry it forward. And at the end of this second week of Elul, really see that the Torah is giving us the instruction manual for this time period, to say, this is the week that out of your month of preparation of Elul, you concentrate on the mitzvahs, on those commandments in the Torah that really focus on the vulnerable parts of people, of society around us, and the world around us. And just to point out a few examples, we have in chapter, extending even to somebody who has died. And this comes in chapter 21, verse 23, and it refers to a person who was convicted of a capital offence. They've been sentenced to death and they've been hung. And you would have thought that we don't need to concern ourselves too much with their posthumous welfare, certainly their posthumous welfare. They're not alive anymore, so we don't need to be considerate of them. But that is wrong, because the Torah states very clearly to the contrary. So chapter 21, verse 23, Lo solin nivloso al ha'etz. You shall not leave his body overnight on the tree. Ki kovor tikborenu bayom hahu. You should surely bury him on that day. Ki klilas Elohim toloi velo setame es admoscha. Asher Hashem Elohecha nosein lecha nachala. You should bury him on that very day, for a hanging corpse is offensive to God. And Rashi says this person, doesn't matter that he had committed a capital offense and he'd been hung for this crime, he is created in Hashem's image, and you will not defile your land, which God, your God, is giving you as an inheritance. And this is such a poignant example of the extent to which we are looking after a vulnerable person, somebody who has committed this crime, and even in death there is respect, and there is a protocol that one has to follow. And enough horror stories have been written and read over many years, and in more recent history, in the Holocaust, when the Nazis, Yamach Shimon, left people hanging for extended periods of time. And this evil, inhumane behavior, and as far as the Torah is concerned, even in a portion of the Torah that is talking about war, that is talking about battlefields, that kind of conduct is against the values and against the principles of the Torah. This is stated very clearly. And Rashi actually says it very beautifully on verse 23, chapter 21. Ki klelas Elohim toloi, for a hanging person is an insult of God. Zilzula shel melechu, it is a degradation of the king. She'odom osoi b'dmus diokno, for man is made in the likeness of Hashem's image. The Yisrael heim bonov, and Israel are his sons. Moshel lishnei achim ta'omim. This can be compared to two twin brothers, shehayu domim zelozeh, who resembled each other. Echad na'aseh melech, one became a king, ve'echad nispases lilistios, one became ensnared in robbery. Tisla, Vanisla, and was hung. Kol roe also, whoever would see him hanging, Omer would say, Hamelach toloi, the king is hanging. Kol klola sheba mikra, any instance of the word klola in the Torah, loshon hokel v'zilzul, means treating lightly and demeaning. And so this parable that Rashi brings, that to leave a human being in this way is an insult to Hashem. And I think that is also protecting the dignity of the person as well, in even unto this extreme. And I think that the Torah portion, the mitzvahs continue, and they come one after another. And we see that this consideration of looking after vulnerable will even extend to animals. And in chapter 22, Lo sira es shor ochicha eseo, you should not watch your brother's ox or sheep, nidochim, straying, v'hisalam tomehem, and you make yourself disappear from them. You pretend that you can't see. It's got nothing to do with me. There's just this animal walking around by itself. Hoshev teshiveh la'achecha, you shall surely return them to your brother. Ve'im lo korav achicha alecha, and if your brother doesn't live close to you, below your dato, and you don't even know whom these animals belong to. Va'asakta el toch beisecha v'haya imcha ad derosh achicha oso, and you will gather them into your house, into the midst of your house, and it will be with you until your brother comes to seek it, v'hashevoselo, and you return it to him. And the pasuk continues, "V'chein ta'aseh v'lechamero," so you shall do to his ass. "V'chein ta'aseh l'sim loso," and so you shall do to his garment. "V'chein ta'aseh l'chol avedas achicha," and so you shall do to any lost property of your brother. "Asher tovad mimeno," which is lost to him. "Umatzasa," and you find it. "Lo suchal lehisaleh," you cannot hide yourself. You cannot pretend you can't see it. And this is, again, taking it to such an extreme level of concern, of care for a person who is in a vulnerable situation, and the animal, the lost animal, again, considering as part of Hashem's creations, how we relate to the world around us. And this is character refinement. This is going against so many natural instincts that we would have to think that this has got nothing to do with us. We don't need to care for this particular animal. They are in a vulnerable situation. We have to double down. We have to really make sure that we do our best efforts to restore them, to restore the property, to restore the animals to their rightful owner. And and this is another angle, that the concept of caring for the vulnerable, of putting yourself out for someone who is in this situation or something in this situation, is so apparent. And the animal, the famous mitzvah of Shiluach Haken, which is sending away the mother bird. And again, this is the bird is extremely vulnerable. The mother bird, who would normally use her wings to fly away and escape, is not doing that because she is protecting her eggs, her babies, and we do not want to take advantage of that acute vulnerability at that point. And this is something that people are often very, very perplexed, that a mitzvah that seems to be such a, in inverted commas, easy mitzvah to perform, you just shoo away the mother bird and then you can take the eggs, and the reward of long life is promised, which we think is as out of proportion, it's such a huge reward. But not only that, the only other place in the Torah where a reward for mitzvahs is mentioned, and this particular reward is the mitzvah of honoring one's father and mother. And on the one hand, it can be very difficult to see a connection. On the other hand, we see it is this concept of a maternal paternal instinct that is being honored, that is being protected, and there is a common denominator, even though on the face of it the two situations appear very different, but there is that connection. But the bottom line is that we are, in this week's Zedra, showing that concern and protecting the mother bird from that acute suffering of seeing her offspring being taken from her. And then the Torah continues, again, looking after the vulnerable in a very striking way. And this is the Pasuk 8, verse chapter 22. Ki sivne bayis chodosh, if you should build a new home, va'asiso ma'akeh legagecha, and you will make a fence, a guardrail for your roof, below sosim domim beveisecha, and you will not allow blood to be spilled in your house, ki yipol hanofel mimeno, when somebody falls from it. So again, somebody comes onto your house, you have a roof, you haven't put a guardrail up, they are very vulnerable. And if they fall from a height, then if it doesn't kill them, it can certainly cause them very serious damage. And when I was studying law, there was a very interesting case that was introduced in 1984 in the Occupiers Liability Act, because before that time, if a trespasser, if somebody was not invited onto another person's property and they hurt themselves in any way on that property, then the owner was not liable. The owner was only liable for people who he had invited onto his property. And there was a famous case where children were playing in a field, and there was a disused mine, and one of the children fell down the shaft, I believe, and was either severely injured or killed. But there was no responsibility, no liability on the part of the owners, because the children were trespassers. And that was only changed in 1984. Otherwise, people could effectively have a death trap on their property, and they weren't responsible for the damage that was caused to anybody who had not been invited onto the property. So here the Torah, ahead of its time, above time, is saying that's not acceptable. You cannot have anything on your property that is going to be such a high chance of harm to another person, irrespective of whether you have asked for them to come on your property or not. It is about caring for the vulnerable. And then we see as well that we are not allowed to charge interest on a loan. somebody who is in need of a loan, and by charging interest, you are taking advantage of that vulnerability. And the Torah is saying, no, this is not how we have to behave. When somebody's vulnerable, we need to rather help them, protect them, and make sure that they are able to come out of whatever this negative situation and not drive them further into it. And the laws of modesty as well, which protect men and women both equally. Whether it's modesty in dress, that women should not wear men's clothes, men should not wear women's clothes, and the prohibition against no lo sier kadeshom bibnos Yisrael, chapter 23, verse 18, that no Jewish girl may be promiscuous, below yer kodesh mibnei Yisrael, no Jewish man may be promiscuous. Again, anybody who is behaving in this way is acutely vulnerable, and the Torah is warning us that this is behavior that is going to cause a cascade of terrible problems, terrible consequences, and the Torah is warning us against this behavior. And this concept of not keeping the money that is owed for to an employee overnight. This is chapter 24, verse 14. Lo saso socher oni be'evyon. You must not withhold the wages of a poor or destitute hired worker, me'achecha, from your brothers, or migerecha, or from converts in your land, people who are gerim, asher ba'artzecha b'sharecha, that are in your land and within your cities. B'yomei sitein sechoro, on the day that his wage is due, that's when you have to pay. V'lo sovi olav hashemesh, and the sun should not set on him, ki onihu, because he is a poor person, ve'elov hu nosei es nafsho, and he endangers his life to work for you. V'lo yikra alecha el Adonai v'haya b'chochet, and do not cause him to cry out to God against you, for then the punishment of this sin will be upon you. And again, this is showing high levels of consideration for an employee who is reliant from day to day. What he earns today is going to be what he buys his food with today. And in this way, just to pay him the following morning, you have every intention of paying him, but that is going to mean that he has a night of anxiety, of sleepless, of very great worry that he is not going to be able to feed his family, feed himself. And really, we are shown by the Torah that we need to consider, we need to make sure that we go the extra mile, that we make sure that this person has his wages before the sun sets. And darkness, in the real sense and in the metaphorical sense, will not descend upon him. And that is something so fundamental. And I think that so many of the themes and the mitzvahs that span this Sedra fit into this category of looking out, acting in such a way that we are completely considerate of those people in vulnerable situations, animals in vulnerable situations. And very fascinating, the fact that the end of the Sedra tells us about this command to obliterate the memory of Amalek. And we read this on the Shabbat before Purim every year. This is Parshas Zohar. And I think it's completely appropriate. It fits in so perfectly, because what was Amalek's calling card, as it were? What does Amalek stand for? Amalek, when he attacks the weak and the vulnerable. And not only the weak and the vulnerable of a strong population, the weak and the vulnerable of a population that has just emerged from 210 years of slavery. And so we are ending the Sedra to show that the conduct of Amalek, this is conduct as we are commanded to remember, to wipe out the memory. But in so doing, we are able to look at that conduct and see that this is the antithesis of the Torah. This, the way we define ourselves on the battlefield in a war, God forbid, on the battlefield of our lives as we are struggling against the Yetzer Hara and various challenges. But we are going to use as our guide, as our yardstick, the 74 commandments in this week's Sedra and the 613 in the rest of the Torah. But really, in this week, second week of Elul, really honing those skills, those sensitivities, and in this way utilizing the gift of the second week of Elul, and becoming better prepared to arrive at Rosh Hashanah and be able to really celebrate it and have the right mindset and having done the preparation that was required beforehand. Thank you very much for listening and wishing you a very good Shabbos.